Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Review Roundup. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the latest and sometimes greatest films coming to a cinema near you. Today, we are talking about The Smashing Machine, directed by Benny Safdie, one half of the Safdie brothers, of course, who did Uncut Gems. Oh, I'm just fixing my mic here. He was also he's also kind of had like a little bit of an acting career. He was in Oppenheimer. I forget the scientist's name, but he's like the one in Oppenheimer who's like, we have to make a hydrogen bomb. But going back to The Smashing Machine here, the story of a legendary mixed martial arts and UFC fighter, Mark Kerr. But before we go any further, if you haven't yet, please like this video. It really, really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people finding the channel. And since you found the channel, why not subscribe? This way, you're never going to miss reviews like this. This is going to mainly be like a pseudo-spoiler review. I'm going to try not to bring up spoilers, but if there's something that really illustrates my point, I just can't resist. I'm going to have to say it. But we can and will get into full spoilers at the end, so I can read out any of your questions and your comments. So to that end, leave questions and comments, right? If you're watching this live, first of all, welcome. And second of all, conversations like this are always more interesting when we can have a dialogue. So as I'm going through my own thoughts, let me know what you think. Unless it's like something offensive, I will read every comment and question from the live chat. If you're watching this after the fact, we're still super happy to have you. By the time that you're watching this, there should be time codes in the description so you can kind of jump around at your leisure. And same deal as before, you should definitely subscribe so that you can join us live next time. So kind of jumping right into my thoughts here. This was a thoroughly enjoyable biopic. I've seen many over the years, and this film mercifully avoids many of the cliches that befall films like this, not only biopics in general, but like the sports biopic in particular. And I feel like wrestling ones have become a bigger thing. Obviously, this is very much in the mold of something like The Wrestler. That being said, that's not really super recent. That was like 2008? So, 15, 20 years ago. But even something as recent as The Iron Claw, right? Which is a very different kind of wrestling film. And obviously this isn't quite wrestling, but it's a very similar, it's like all the same ballpark. Though it is different than wrestling for the reasons that we'll kind of talk about in just a second. But I was kind of looking around because I'm always curious to see what other people are saying about these movies. And on Rotten Tomatoes, there's like the critical consensus, right? Which I imagine today they just use AI, but back in the day someone had to like actually write this. Is like go through all the reviews and kind of, if you could sum up all like the entire critical reaction into like one sentence, what would it be? And the Rotten Tomatoes critical consensus for this movie, part of it notes that the film, quote, sidesteps cliche even at the expense of narrative satisfaction, end quote. And I think whoever wrote that, if it was AI, okay, whatever. If someone wrote that, that was really insightful. Because while it's very enjoyable, and typically avoids the cliches, again, that plague this genre. Because of that, the reason there's the cliches are a cliche for a reason. And this is a totally unrelated example, but something I think about all the time when thinking about things like this is the movie Avatar, right? The original movie is so paint by numbers, right? But the paint by numbers structure there's a reason why it's paint by numbers, right? It has a very clear structure with very clear character arcs and motivations, right? And you've seen it 1,000 times, but there is something like functional about it, right? And this film kind of has the opposite problem, where it's not falling into those traps that so many sports biopics fall into, but as a result, it doesn't have a super, super strong identity of its own. And the narrative really is lacking in like a strong shape. Like, what's the shape of this story? It's structurally very gooey, if I could, for lack of a better word, right? The pacing was really strong, but during it, I had no idea how far we were into the movie, which is both a blessing and a curse. A blessing in the sense that you I was just so engrossed that I wasn't like, oh, like how much longer. But on the flip side, a really well structured story, you should feel okay. We're approaching the climax. You're approaching. Whereas like I would have to check my watch and be like, oh, we're like halfway through the movie, or like, oh, like there's literally 10 minutes left. It really lacked a strong thematic dimensionality to it, right? And I'll give you an example. That like final moment, not the final moment, but like the final moment with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, where essentially he's lost, right? Truly lost for the first time, because prior it was kind of like a technicality. He didn't lose, but he finally loses, and he's all fucked up. And his buddy goes on to continue the tournament, and then eventually win the tournament, right, in Japan. And Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is just standing in the shower after getting, not surgery, but some work done, some stitches on his jaw or chin or whatever. He's just standing in the shower. And he just starts laughing. And not like laughing like something's funny, but the way you laugh when you're finally like relieved, like something's over, right? Like, just this kind of overwhelming sense of catharsis that it seems like the Mark Kerr character is experiencing. And the problem with this is that it's thematically ambiguous, right? Stories, and all of this to say that film structure and like the way you should make a movie, I'm very suspicious of like all of like the books, like the screenwriting books, like the art of storytelling or like things that super focus in on the 3-act structure. Those things are really important. But the origin of that kind of study was descriptive. But now young enterprising screenwriters have made it prescriptive, right? It's like, oh, if you just follow this blueprint, your film's going to be good. And it's not true. What the 3-act structure is a description of how stories seem to, on a whole, on a cultural level, seem to have parallels between one another. But that being said, your last moment with your character theoretically should kind of reveal something about the character or kind of put a button on their arc. But here, like, I'm not really sure what I'm meant to take away from it. I've been reflecting on it because I saw this last evening. I've been reflecting on it, and I think the answer could be, but underline could, but I don't think it's meant to be interpretive, right? That's the thing. Just because it's not clear doesn't mean it's artsy or something, right? I kind of interpret it as he's finally truly lost, right? Because that was like the big thing, is that he had never lost, and then he kind of lost on technicality, and then kind of worked back up to this tournament, and then he finally lost. This was a full-on, just unambiguous loss. And the fact he made it to the other side, right? It's like, oh, I lost, but I'm still here. I'm not dead. I'm breathing. My blood's still pumping through my veins. And there's like that sense of catharsis of like, oh, yes, this is awful, but I'm alive. Like, I'm still here. Like, life is going to keep going. And that kind of, earlier in the film, a reporter asks him like, oh, like, what would it be like if you lost? And Mark Kerr, like, as sincerely as possible, kind of like, avoids the question. Or avoids answering the question, because he's basically like, I wouldn't even know what that's like. I couldn't even describe, I can't even tell you how I would feel, because it's something I've never experienced, so I wouldn't know. So, in a sense, the film is kind of a story about, coming to terms with the fact that you can lose, but that you're going to be okay. That it's now that he's finally lost, it's no longer this abstract, horrifying unknown of unknown proportion. But my point is, that's my interpretation. I don't know if the film is trying to say that. And again, it's very thematically gooey. Despite the film's very engaging with that strong pacing. But when you kind of walk away from it, and as the credits roll, you kind of go, okay, well, that was really strong. There's so many elements that were really, really strong here. but like what's all together? You could have all of the best ingredients. You go to Whole Foods or some other, let's go even a step further, like a really high-end grocery store. You can get all these amazing ingredients. But if you don't know how to put them all together, you're just going to have a lot of really great ingredients, not necessarily something that the whole isn't necessarily going to be more than the sum of its parts. But if for nothing else, the film was a really interesting look into mixed martial arts, something I'm not super familiar with. I just basically, my understanding of it is basically like wrestling, but real, right? Like it is as violent as wrestling looks, but it is actually violent. It's not, it's not fabricated. It's not staged. It's not theatrical. It's not as theatrical. I'm also just fixing my microphone again. It's not, they don't have these storylines, like these like cartoonishly rendered characters. This is really like, again, mixed martial arts. And I'm such an idiot. I never quite put together that literally mixed martial arts it's called that because it literally is mixing different forms of martial arts. So it's really, we haven't really seen a lot of films about UFC and MMA. So if for no other reason, it was just a really interesting to get the chance to kind of explore this world. And I imagine a lot of, especially because I think UFC, I could totally be speaking, this is totally in conjecture, but isn't UFC like behind like a premium paywall? Like it's not necessarily something that's just on like Fox Sports. So it's not something that like most audiences really know all that much about, even in 2025, contrasting that with, the film really wants to suggest Mark Kerr as this foundational figure in the MMA world, as he is. And that's kind of like the idea of the film, is that, this person who was like a defining contributor to the origins of this this sport is pretty unknown to average people. Like, I mean, I never had heard of Mark Kerr until doing research for this movie. So for no other reason, the movie kind of gives you an interesting look into a world. Not only just getting to see UFC in general, but also getting to see the behind the scenes and the personalities that are kind of involved there. So looking here, the characters are really the focal point. This is capital C, capital P character piece. Anchored, of course, by a fantastic performance by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. His performance is a bit one note, right? There's not a lot of, it's not very dynamic. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It's nonetheless very authentic and very magnetic. And again, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has been a media personality for decades now. And it's not an accident. He's a very magnetic kind of person. And he brings that into this role. And the character of Mark Kerr is really interesting. Especially given our current socio-political moment of like the manosphere and like hyper-masculinity. Even though this takes place in like the late 90s into the year 2000, it very much feels like it's relevant to our time, right? This is a character who's haunted or oppressed, maybe is a better word, by his own sense of power, right? He gives his interview earlier in the film, basically saying it's like I forget his exact wording, but he's describing, the fight as or rather what he experiences in the fight as something primordial, evolutionary, and later in the film he talks about it being the best high you could ever have. It's orgasmic, he says. To which his partner, his girlfriend Dawn, played by Emily Blunt, kind of laughs, but he's like, no, I'm serious. Like, it is the best feeling, the fight as well as the crowd, the adulation from the crowd. But there's a cost to that power, or rather, the key is not to have the power, it's about feeling like you have the power, right? And ultimately we see throughout the story how fragile he really is, and not like in a bad way. Like he seems a lot of the time to be a very sweet and gentle man. Now again, I don't really know much about real Mark Kerr, so I don't want people commenting like, oh, he's actually this awful person. I don't know. I'm just saying this character, right, who happens to be based on a real person, seems very sweet and like he talks about having like, oh, that's gonna hurt my tummy, like with no sense of irony. And it's just like it's cute, right? But what's not cute again is that like that toxic masculinity, that need to feel like a quote unquote man, right? To be the big strong man, to the point where he even says that almost verbatim when him and his girlfriend are having a fight, and he's like, I need to feel like I'm the big strong man, and he says in so many words. But they're not that different from what I said. Like it's pretty like explicit. And it's less about strength and more about control, or feeling like he has control, whether it be in the ring, right? Or how the pool is cleaned, right? Or in shooting up drugs. Like this idea of control. Like I don't want to diagnose him, but definitely some elements of like OCD, or at least a compulsive, micromanagement. And again, there's a lot that's required for him to maintain this illusion. Again, not only to others, but to himself. So there's a lot of interesting character stuff to be explored here. And the film is more of a portrait, right? Though again, it's not clear what we should take away from that portrait. Again, other than that this guy went to hell and back for this sport, falling into the depths of addiction and coming back and having all these personal troubles, just for then no average person to know who he is. I guess that's the point, but I don't know if that's explicit enough or it's not really. Again, the film lacks a shape. It's this gooey, squishy kind of thing that can kind of be a bunch of things, but isn't really any of them completely. Just a sidebar, not to be ageist, but, it is worth mentioning that Mark Kerr at this point in his life is supposed to be like in his 30s, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson today is like in his mid to late 50s. So he's playing like 20 years younger, and it shows, right? He doesn't look like he's 50, and I think it helps because both The Rock and Mark Kerr are so like cartoonishly jacked that you're not even thinking about age. Like, oh, do they look their age? Because they don't even look like a normal human being, frankly. But this also reflects like there's this whole thing with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson of like wanting to be an actor, and he's been obviously an actor and has been in things for like 20 years now. But I feel like this film is his. I don't want to say desperate attempt, because I don't want to put like a value judgment on it, but it feels like his attempt, however you want to classify it, his attempt at being like a serious actor. And I just feel this was a great performance by him, but I think he wasted a decade of goodwill. Maybe not goodwill, but rather cultural cachet, right? Star power. He basically has spent the last decade being in shitty action adventure blockbusters. And it's so funny that like in this he was talking about like, I think I saw like a promotional clip of him being interviewed, like him, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And I forget what he said, so if maybe someone who's watching this knows what I'm talking about and you can comment about it. But he was like, oh, this isn't like a comic book movie. This is like this is cinema. And it's like, bro, literally like just a couple years ago, you were trying to save the DCEU and you were going to be the thing that saved it with Black Adam. And then that movie was I don't even call it a disaster because I didn't even see it, but just like, it just kind of fell on its face. And now all of a sudden you care about cinema, right? It's like, I think your ego is bruised a little. So I feel that just bears mentioning that he is a 56-year-old playing like a 32-year-old. And it would, it would have been interesting to, but at the same time, I don't even want to say he should have done this movie 10, 15 years ago, because maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe like he needed that time to develop as an actor. But I gotta say, if his attempt is to prove that he can be like a good actor, I think mission accomplished. I think he did a really strong job here. Who also did a really good job was Emily Blunt, right? Again, as I said, who plays his girlfriend Dawn. And she is so good in this movie. You know, to the point where it almost hurts the movie. Because her character becomes almost like too empathetic. And I'll explain what I mean. And if you've seen the movie, maybe you kind of have a sense of what I'm talking about. Purely like in the text, like on a script level, my guess is that she's meant to be sympathetic, but very incredibly flawed, problematic, and the script kind of positions her as the thing that brings Mark down, the thing that creates conflict and lack of clarity in his soul, even, right? And the way they accomplish this, though, again, this is based on true life, is that she's very mentally unwell, or at least becomes mentally unwell, to the point where, you know, she even tries to kill herself in front of him with a gun, spoiler alert. But the problem is that Emily Blunt is such a great actress, in general, but especially in this movie, that she doesn't seem as problematic or unwell until it's like very clear. Like it's like, okay, I kind of see where you're coming from here. And then like the next scene, she has a gun to her head. Like it was very jarring. And I think the audience that I was at the screening I went to, you know, I think like no, everyone was shocked. I mean, it's shocking to see someone pull out a gun and attempt to shoot themselves in the head. But I think part of that shock was also like, whoa, like where did this come from? But again, she's so good. This is so misogynistic of me, but the sexiest that she's ever been. Like I mean, it's the character, you know, because she's meant to kind of be like this kind of, you know, I don't even know how to describe it. But very, very sexy, and I was like, damn girl. Like, I didn't know you could do that. I don't even know how else to say it. I'm going to move on before I get canceled. So, but yeah, Johnson and Blunt, they have, I don't even know if they have good chemistry together, but any imperfection in the chemistry, I think, is a plus to the narrative, because there's like this forever kind of uneasiness between the two of them, where it's like they probably aren't good for one another, but they're each other's person in a way. And I guess in real life they eventually get married, but then got divorced. So, you know, and that's one of the things I don't like about movies based on true stories, is that, because, you know, life doesn't have a narrative shape usually, right? So sometimes you'll watch a movie and it'll be based on a true story, it's really great, and then like the text at the end doesn't complicate your read of the movie, but it's just like, oh yeah, and then all this extra stuff kind of happened, and it's like I almost wish I didn't know what happens after. And again, this isn't even an issue of like, oh, Peter, just don't look it up. Like they do like the classic Bible. Where are they now, right? But in any case, but the two of them really disappear into their roles. Johnson mostly because of the makeup, I would say. But then Blunt especially, just because of how strong her performance is, with an American accent, obviously. And you know who else does a really good job is Ryan Bader. So he plays Mark Coleman, who's like The Rock's character's like best friend, you know, opponent in some cases. You know, like they're both in the same sphere. They never actually go toe to toe. But this Ryan Bader fellow is an actual MMA fighter. He's not an actor. I don't know how he got this role, but he was surprisingly good. He really brought a naturalism and warmth to the role. You know, really representing like that friend that will always be there for you unconditionally, who knew you back when, right? And I was surprised. I was like, he looks so familiar. I swear I've seen this guy in a couple other movies before. And then I looked him up on Letterboxd, and he had like almost no credits, and I was like, okay, maybe he's like a television actor. Maybe I've seen him on TV or something. And I look it up, and I can't even find a filmography. And I'm like, wait. And I go back up to the top and like read it on Wikipedia, and he's like primarily a fighter. Like, I was so surprised. I thought he did a really, really solid job. He should be proud of himself. I thought he did I was always happy to see him in any scene, just because he just like really grounded things, because he's like the contrast to Mark Kerr, because he's like well adjusted. He has like a wife, a couple kids, like he's just like the exact opposite of their lives, but they're all intermingled and intertwined. And then kind of just briefly before I wrap up here, talk a little bit about the filmmaking. Benny Safdie really delivers on some fantastic direction, which is to be expected. I unfortunately have not seen his and his brother's film Good Time, which was kind of like their big breakout, but Uncut Gems I have seen, which is probably their biggest film. And that's like an incredible one of the best of the decade kind of movies. And that command of the visual form is not lost in going solo as a director. This isn't like revelatory, but there was a really great example of just like if I taught like a film class, like high school students, I would definitely show this scene. So there's this scene. So in the film, right, he's had this whole loss that wasn't really a loss. It was like a no contest technicality thing. But again, the big thing for him is that when he actually is on the precipice of losing, he like the fight or flight, he goes into freeze, right? And he even says that in other parts. He's like, I couldn't move my body. He goes through all this trauma, and then he goes to rehab with the drug addiction, and then he comes back. And him and Dawn go to like this carnival, and there's like, it's not quite monster trucks because they look like normal like sedans, but like this kind of like crashing cars spectacle thing. I'm so like white and like suburban and like I'm sure this is like a normal thing in like most parts of America, but I just have no idea. But there's this one car that just keeps getting pummeled, and it's just to the point where the car, it can't even get out. It's like just pinned in, just getting hit, and there's this great editing, and without a scene later with Mark Kerr explaining what was going on, it was clear he was getting triggered, right? It was clear he was experiencing some kind of traumatic response by watching the pounding that this car was getting. And you could see him getting anxious and fidgety and looking around, trying to get out. And that's really what cinema is so great at, is using editing as an X-ray machine, right? Using editing to bring about the unvisualizable, right? I think Martin Scorsese calls it like the phantom frame, right? If you have a frame, if you have like a shot and then you cut to the other shot, there's this third other thing that's happening. And it's the relationship between the two shots. So I thought Safdie's direction really elevated. Again, what could otherwise have been like I've said, like the buzzword a million times, a shapeless narrative. And again, visually, it's viscerally rendered. It's has almost like this like gritty documentary style. And something that I wasn't expecting was, I thought what really helped elevate the film was the score. This like experimental jazz kind of backtracking. And I had to like do some research and look this up. So with MMA, right? So earlier in the film, an announcer refers to Mark Kerr as an experimental fighter. And I was like, is that like particular to him? Like that's his style? But I think what they refer, because it's like earlier in the origins of MMA. So the announcer just like wasn't as familiar with it. I think they were saying like on the whole, MMA is very experimental, especially at that point. So it's kind of cool to have music, the music that parallels the experimentality of early MMA, right? That there's no roadmap. There's no, you don't know where this story is going to go. You as like the person participating in this world. You don't know if you're gonna flame out and be 55, like they show the real Mark Kerr at the end. You don't know if you're gonna flame out and be 50 something, and then just going to grocery stores and no one recognizing you, or if you're gonna become like Michael Jordan. It was so unclear at that time. And it was really interesting just to see, like I mentioned before, just getting to see this world, this MMA world on screen, especially the big screen. And again, with cinematography so gritty and so intimate, it was really something to say. All right, so before wrapping up, I want to take a look at the comments, and there are none. Why is no one saying anything? There's 2 concurrent viewers. Have you not seen the movie? Again, if you're watching these, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the live chat, because I will always read them unless there's something really, really offensive about it. So why don't we just move into the final thoughts here? I think overall, this is a nearly great movie. It has all of the makings to be really, really great. I think it's just missing that last little je ne sais quoi to kind of tie it all together. Maybe I would like this a little bit more on a second viewing. Having some time to sit on it. Maybe I would like it less now that I kind of have a sense of its shortcomings. But definitely something I think that's worth checking out. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I am going to give The Smashing Machine a 7, right? It's nearly great. It's just below that 8. Like if you had decimals, it would be like 7.9. It's just so close, but it just doesn't quite know what it wants to be. And I think that reflects Mark Kerr in a way. So on that note, that's it for this installment of Review Roundup. Thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please like this video. It really, really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people finding the channel. And since you found the channel, why not subscribe? This way, you never miss a video. And don't forget to comment below and let me know what you think of The Smashing Machine. Until next time, peace out.